Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we're going to be talking about Russell Moore and his butthurt. He's butthurt about churches that did not buy into the branch Covidian narrative that Russell Moore peddled. Because, reminder, Russell Moore was one of the figures that touted Francis Collins, a mass murderer, as one of us. And Francis Collins is most certainly not one of us. This was pretty obvious when the fact that he doesn't actually believe in a historical, real, biblical Adam. So, again, that is grounds for saying he's not one of us. So, with that said, we're going to be talking about a podcast that Russell Moore did with a New York Times reporter who I guess claims to be evangelical or claims to have the solutions to evangelical. He wrote a piece, I guess, for the New York Times that was, according to him in this podcast, read primarily by Times readers. And it was about, defectors in evangelicalism, basically talking about how people like Tim Keller are trying to save evangelicalism from itself. But is that really the case? Well, we're going to be talking about Russell Moore's butthurt, about the general lack of influence that his crowd has over the church and how they are losing control. They are losing. And that's really good news. That's good news. That's not the gospel level of good news, but it is good news that they are losing and they know it and they are whining about it. And I want to hear them whine about it some more. It's just, it's joy to hear. It is joy to hear. So with that said, we're going to pick up right around here. And we're going to watch hopefully just about 9 minutes of this whole thing at 1.25 speed. It is the Russell Moore Show, and David Brooks, a New York Times columnist, is his guest. Again, lefty and lefty love.
A mental health emergency. I mean, it seems like every day I'm talking to someone who's developing a substance abuse problem or who is at the point of despair. I mean, is something different?
So, again, the context here is he's trying to ask whether he's taking crazy pills or not, or, what is actually going on. Are we in a unique situation historically, or is that just something we're making up in our heads because we had no sense of perspective?
Now, and if so, what?
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely tell you the New York Times is definitely crazier than it seems. But as for the larger Times, no, I think that it's beyond dispute. If you look at the statistics, it's something weird and spiritual and moral to me. The number of people who say they have no close friends has quadrupled in a generation. The number of people who have committed suicide has risen by a third since 2000. The number of people suffering from depression is up 57%. 54% of Americans say no one knows me well. And add on top of that the by now familiar statistics on opioid addictions and all the rest, and political polarization, record rise in hate crimes, violence in our city centers. There's just a whole raft of statistics that are just terrible. And I spent a lot of time obsessing what is going on, because a lot of these things don't seem to have much to do with each other. Drunk driving, why are traffic fatalities over the last 2 years are up, even though the number of miles we're driving is way down because of COVID? Why are people driving more recklessly?
Just a comment on that. If I had to take a guess, illegal immigration. Because illegal immigrants have far less regard for drinking and driving statutes. And if I recall, drunk driving is not a deportable offense, which makes no sense because I've heard it said that this is the number one indicator that we have available. If you want to predict someone's, particularly an immigrant's future crime or capacity for violent crime, drunk driving is like your biggest signal, that your biggest red flag that you got.
Why are there more fights on airplanes? Some of it is COVID exhaustion, but these trends started in 2000 or 2013.
What's happened a lot since 2013? Open borders.
COVID was just the capstone on the case of a lot of big trends. And I could tell you a lot of stories about why this is happening. Some of it would be sociological, that we're just hanging out with each other less, and what they call social capital is on the way down. And that's a sociological story. I could tell you a technological story that social media is really having a negative effect. I can tell you an economic story. There's a lot of people who are economically insecure. The one I'm thinking about most these days is really a moral story. That for much of American history, put aside religion for a second, we had a sense that character was something you worked on, that we were fundamentally sinful and broken people. and that therefore you needed to work on your sin. You needed to some form of moral formation. It could be within a faith, but it didn't have to be. You could go to the Marine Corps, or you could go to university and you could read great books and try to see, how can I work on my selfishness, my sinfulness, and lead a worthwhile life? We sort of threw away that whole character ethos around about the 1950s, and we said, I'm good. I'm not sinful. Deep inside me is something really good. And that maybe worked for a while, but essentially people lost a sense of meaning in life, sense of purpose, and it turns out we're not really good inside. And out of that sort of excessive trust in self came a period of moral anarchy, the breakup in family, the breakup in marriage. And people can't stand moral anarchy, and they will do anything to get out of it. And so to me, what they've chosen to try to get out of the moral anarchy is politics. And politics is a moral system that says, I'm good, my enemies are evil, and I will achieve righteousness by fighting my foes. And in this case, the cure...
Okay, that's a bit of a straw man. Politics is the art of civil war. It is also just governing in general. This type of logic is asinine because it implies that you can't legislate morality. It's actually you can, and that all legislation is practically morality. So that leads to that nonsense idea of you can have a neutral society. That's not how it works. Because if we want to actually look at history, we will see a story of the government has furthered the decadence in our society. I mean, you can just go back to things like Jim Crow, where the government in Plessy versus Ferguson, which if you actually look into that case, it's really messed up, the details of that case. The government created segregation, which in turn solidified racism. The government did that. Again, if you want to look at, why is transgenderism a thing? The government erased part of the Constitution that talks about states having the ability to regulate marriage, gave the whole country gay marriage in one fell swoop, and that just led to the onslaught of transgenderism. Now we're getting all these swinger relationships that are being celebrated on social media and all that other stuff. So government does have a role to play in morality. Romans 13 tells us that it's supposed to be the avenging angel. So this guy does not know what he's talking about in terms of what politics is and what it can do, especially to achieve goals as it relates to morality.
Cure is worse than disease. We went from moral anarchy to moral war.
Well, and it seems as though what's happened is not a kind of non-judgmentalism, we're all basically good, so I'm not a sinner in need of working on my character, to a almost the opposite of that. We're all basically completely depraved, and therefore I have to be as angry and as vicious as you are if I'm going to survive, and therefore everything's in total war. Am I seeing that accurately?
Yeah, I'm...
Again, this is where you get back to the effeminate mentality of Russell Moore and how, oh no, mean tweets. And they think that's being vicious. That's what Twitter is for, is mean tweets. This guy can't hang in the real world. He cannot hang when people challenge him and his legitimacy, of which there are a plethora of reasons to do so. So, again, Russell Moore is a whore. I did an entire video on that and how he's sold out. He will sell out to anybody. On the left, that is. I don't think he'll sell out to me. But that's the kind of man that Russell Moore is. There is no real principle there. And there never really has been.
When I was in the 1980s, when I was a kid, I went to the University of Chicago. My favorite saying about University of Chicago is it's a Baptist school where atheist professors teach Jewish students St. Thomas Aquinas. So that was the kind of education I got.
How is that a good thing? Like, that sounds really stupid. So that's the type of person David Brooks is.
And one of my professors there was a guy named Alan Bloom, who wrote a book called Closing the American Mind. And he looked at it as students, and he said it's all moral relativism, what the philosopher Alistair McIntyre called emotivism, which is my morals are whatever feel good for me, and if they feel different for you, that's your morals, and we're all fine. We've gone from that period of relativism, where everybody wanted to eschew judgment, to now a period of extreme judgment, where everybody's under judgment. And I think it's this age of politics, leaving the age of the moral individual and entering the age of tribe. And so now on social media, it's understanding nowhere but judgment everywhere. And it's just a very punishing way to live.
I was talking to a friend not long ago who was talking about where he lives in rural Michigan. And he said there's a church. He said it ran about 150, 200 people. And now it has suddenly exploded over the last year and it's running over 1,000. And he said, why do you suppose that is? And I said, let me guess. And it's not evangelism. It's that the pastor announced that COVID's a hoax and we're going to fight against masks and vaccine mandates and so forth. And this assembled a crowd. And he said that's exactly what happened.
I'm going to pause right here because this is the money shot right here is this line where Russell Moore is clearly disapproving of a church that took advantage and reached out to people by opposing lockdowns, by standing up for what's right and drawing a crowd. And he suggested that this is wrong. So keep in mind that this is the money shot. This is the butthurt right here. The butthurt, feel the butthurt.
And I see that happening all over the country where pastors are saying crazy has become a church growth strategy, not so much at reaching unbelievers, but pulling believers out of churches because it gives this picture of conviction. Is what's happening in evangelicalism, is it just a reflection of these larger trends?
Okay, I want to pause right here because, again, he thinks that we're going crazy in order to attract people. It's like, no, that's called being salt and being light. The fact that, when the whole world's lying to you, when Russell Moore and Big Eva are lying to you, this one church out in rural Michigan is saying we're not locking down, we're not buying into the Great Reset narrative, we're not doing any of this stuff, we're going to stand for truth, we're going to stand for biblical ecclesiology, and that actually draws Christians away from other churches to a real church, not one of these fake homosexual churches, or effeminate, I should say, since I think it's Doug Wilson that uses the term gay Christianity to mean something else, but this effeminate Christianity that says we're not going to take a stand for what's right. We're going to go along to get along with the government because the government is really the head of the church. They're going to, instead of doing that effeminate way, they're actually going to take a stand despite the fact that they may have to suffer an ounce of persecution for keeping their church open. And that's a really sad fact, is that churches weren't willing to risk an ounce of persecution. Not even a whole lot. Like, how many pastors in America defied lockdowns and went to jail? They maybe had to fight fines, and I believe many of them won. But again, we don't have it nearly as bad as our brothers in Canada do. And these people not only didn't support those people in Canada, but again, they wouldn't take their own stand. They just went along to get along with the government because government's their daddy. Government's giving them that PPP loan to bail them out so they can continue to peddle the Branch Covidian narrative. That is what happened in almost every case. I've yet to see a case other than John MacArthur, who famously switched his position of a church that took PPP loans but did not peddle the government narrative. I'm sure it exists out there because a lot of churches did, but the big ones, they didn't. So it's worth noting. So with that said, he fails to see that a church actually being salt and being light will attract believers when a church disregarding biblical ecclesiology, disregarding Romans 13, disregarding Hebrews 10:25, and a host of other Bible verses will turn Christians away from churches. This guy's nuts. Well, he's not nuts. He's just not on your side. He's on the other team.
Or in your view, is there something unique to American evangelical Protestantism?
Yeah, I guess I would say that there's a philosopher in the 1950s, or a psychologist called Eric Fromm, who said, of all kinds of loneliness, moral loneliness is the most lonely. And so if you feel you're morally alone, that you don't have a purpose for living, a meaning, then you will flock to whatever gives you that sense of meaning. And to me, the shame for the church is, I think I had a sentence in that piece you referred to up top, that it's not that Fox News was so exciting, it was the candle of Christian formation was so dim. And
again, always with the Fox News. Fox was peddling the Branch Covidian narrative. Like, Fox is behind the narrative on most occasions, or behind the conservative narrative on most occasions. That's just something that needs to be pointed out. They were slow on COVID. Who knows about January 6th? Since these people love talking about January 6th. That's their 9/11.
So the Christian church, the Gospels give you a moral project to grow more Christ-like and to grow more gracious, and yet that wasn't doing it for people for some reason. I think it's just a failure of formation, and so politics comes along, and it's a lot easier to say the evil is over there than to say the sin is in my heart, and that the line between good and evil doesn't run down every individual; it runs between groups, and it's just a simple moral story. I do not think it's particular to evangelicalism. I think the problem with evangelicalism is they became too acculturated. They absorbed too much of the culture. Instead of being salt and light, they were just a transparent window. Whatever you got will be part of it.
Nothing says I'm not salt and I'm not light quite so much as let's lock down our churches because the government told me to. Let's embrace all the CDC narratives because the government told me to, because the government's my daddy. The government's head of the church. That is the opposite of salt and light. That is what we saw from majority of the churches in the United States, was that. And he wants to talk about the people that are, again, they want to talk about how conservative or faithful churches are the problem. These guys are butthurt that they're losing influence. That is what this comes down to. So they're lashing out at the people that disagree with them and that call them out and do not want them in their churches and, want to diminish their influence and chase them out of the Southern Baptist Convention or whatever other convention because they see right through their lies.
Well, and don't you think part of that is the need for bigness? And I don't mean particularly with churches, but I mean in order to say we're evangelicals, we're influential, you need to pay attention to us, there has to be a really large number of people. So you end up in a situation where an evangelical includes me and Paula White, Tim Keller and Kenneth Copeland. I mean, it's not a very coherent category right now.
Yeah, right. And 40% of evangelicals don't go to church. So, they just use the word as a political label. And, you can tell me better than me, but the word evangelical does have meaning. I mean, it's a very fuzzy meaning, but there's this thing that I've learned about the Bevington Quadrilateral that, there are 4 different things to it and there are belief systems. It's not just we vote for Donald Trump. It's an actual broader movement with actual content to it. And I think that's been washed away. There was a line that haunts me.
I mean, the whole Bevington Quadrilateral thing is nonsense. Again, evangelicalism is really just about fundamental Protestantism that is theologically conservative. That's what evangelical really means. Let's just disregard the quadrilateral because it's just a technicality that allows theological liberals to say that, even though I'm not super theological liberal, I'm still in your club, guys. I'm still an evangelical. Like, Francis Collins is not really an evangelical. He's a theological liberal, but poses as an evangelical. Tim Keller, same thing. Tim Keller does not really believe in that Genesis 1 and 2 actually happened. So he's a theological liberal. That's what that means. So, again, he would not actually be an evangelical but by conviction, but he is in practice because he's been a force subverting the church for his entire life. That's who Tim Keller is. So with that said, I don't know about Russell Moore's views specifically on various miracles of Scripture. But again, Russell Moore has been a clear agent of subversion in the church and trying to get them to adopt theological liberalism or apply theological liberalism. But here's the thing. They think that evangelicals are worshiping politics when actually the reverse is happening. They're worshiping God and actually applying their convictions into their politics, and they can't stand that. That's the opposite of what they say is actually going on. Evangelicals are actually applying their convictions to their politics as they should be doing this entire time. You cannot compartmentalize Christianity in your own life. When you accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, that means you accept Jesus as your Lord as well as your Savior. And that means He's Lord over all of your life, your family life, your private life, your marriage, your job, your location, your politics. All these things should be done to the glory of God. And that is the issue with these clowns, Russell Moore and David Brooks, is they cannot stand evangelicals or Christians applying their beliefs, their convictions in the political realm, because that puts them at odds with people like Russell Moore, who have been terrible at affecting politics for good and for Christians his entire career in doing so. These guys are frauds. They're hacks. Russell Moore has wasted so much money of the Southern Baptist Convention. It's not funny. It's just tragic. And they can't stand people seeing the light. They long for the days when people just outsource responsibility to them to misuse millions of dollars of funds. That's what they long for. And I believe that's the last part I really want to touch upon. That's all I got to say about this for now. Like, I don't want to do the entire video because, again, it's long, even at 1.25 speed. So I'm going to cut it off here. This is Ray. This is the Evangelical Dark Web. If you like the content, subscribe to the channel. And, again, early likes really help with YouTube algorithms, because it just does. And let me know what you think about what I think. I love comment sections. I live for the comment section. And have a blessed day. I will catch you on the next one.